Holla ballers, what's going on? It's Precher, and recently topics popping up everywhere with the seemingly growing demise of guilds, particularly in the Mythic raiding scene. And what's going on there, with huge amounts of theories being thrown around, hell of a lot of input from guys who are non-raiders, who have a kind of skewed view of what they believe Mythic raiding should be like, despite not taking part in it and not really understanding how it all works, as well as other people just trying to put some sort of sense or logic and apply some sort of reasoning as to why this might be happening. Now, I think it makes sense that I, as somebody who focuses extremely on PvE and training you guys to get up to Mythic rating standard, should have some input on this, but I like to throw numbers of it. I don't believe in feely-feels when talking about this stuff. If we can apply some sort of data to it, I think that's an important step to take. Sorry, I got a little cough right now. So I've done that. I've done some research because I had feely-feels about why it might be happening. And I was not sure until I went in and did some digging and found, yeah, this is absolutely the case. So what I want to say is there are huge amounts of reasons why people might be getting tired, fatigued, burnt out with the Nighthold, and some very obvious ones to kick us off then, which could absolutely be the case for many, many people. But of course, when it comes to these subjects, it isn't one answer. It isn't one answer, because everybody's different, so the reasoning could be very different. But right now what we see is still 2.5 months after the Nighthold is released, only 40 odd guilds have managed to actually clear the dungeon. That's so little. Holy crap, that's so small. And then a couple of hundred, a few hundred who've managed to get towards the end. And then we have this huge steep of thousands of guilds who are stuck at like 3. And we have this, obviously, wonky skew. So the first thing I'd throw out there as a potential reason is the balancing of the Nighthold is just all over the goddamn place. Sweet mother of God. So what you have is people who managed to clear Emerald Nightmare Mythic and became Mythic guilds. Right? Emerald Nightmare was undertuned, let's say. I would only rate Cenarius and perhaps Il'gynoth as being qualified for Mythic level fights. The rest of them were really quite easy. Maybe Dragons was in there on Mythic, but that was wonky because Heroic and Normal was so bizarrely trivial. And then TOV came out. And TOV stepped up the Mythic game in a new way. And that was to make the mechanics brutally punishing while toning down the difficulty of the mechanics. And that is going to be a running theme. While I think Odin was too long, but decent enough for a Mythic boss, Guam was one of my favourite bosses before it was nerfed. Then we hit Helya, and for the very few guilds who managed to actually defeat Helya before the Nighthold launch, what we found was a fight that was extremely complex and extremely punishing. Anybody who ever did any progress on Mythic Helya will know of the many, many wipes that occurred within the first 20 seconds. And that would then continue on for several minutes, with any minor mistake resulting in an absolute undeniable wipe, start, go again. And it was the beginning of a trend that would unfortunately continue into the Nighthold, which was to make mistakes excruciatingly punishing for the entire raid instead of the individual. And what I mean by that is, of course, if you were to make a mistake in the past, you would die. You cost a combat res, etc., etc. What we found now with the Nighthold is that, perhaps for a number of reasons, one, Blizzard is struggling to make actual mechanics that people with nearly a decade or more of experience aren't just going to crush, which makes sense. Doesn't it make sense? You've got people with so much experience in this game under their belt tackling your content that how far can you push this, really? How complex can the mechanics be? You can't make everything like Helya. So what they decided, or seemingly in my opinion decided to do, was expand the punishment levels of doing things even slightly incorrectly. And this, again, is where people have this really skewed view. Well, you're a Mythic Raider, you should play 100% perfect all the time. Nobody does that. I don't know where that fucking fantasy comes from. But every now and again, especially if you're doing bosses that might take 100 pulls or so, you're going to make a mistake. That's normal human behavior, especially when you've got 20 people. So there's 20 risks for maybe 100 pulls that are going to make some minor error. And what we see in the Nighthold is that means everybody dies. Start again. And certainly in the last 6 bosses, I'd say, that trend is present in every single boss. Is one minor mistake generally leads to a complete fucking fuck up. Everybody's dead. Go again, start again, smash your head against the wall. Now, does that mean I think the Nighthold is too hard? Difficult for me to say because I play mage, and that's not facetious by any means. But most of the mechanics involve a lot of movement, and that's not a problem for me. So, from my perspective, no, I actually think the Nighthold's quite fine. But other classes will easily tell me, it's like, dude, this is just a nightmare for us, an absolute nightmare. So that's going to swing and vary depending on the class. Other potential contributors, besides the balance of the Nighthold and the ludicrous easiness of the first 3 compared to the final 7, is, of course, the AP grind. Sure, that could be a big problem. People are still spamming Mythic Plus even now to try and get more Legos because they still haven't got the absolute ideal setup, including myself. And obviously the ever-looming 7.2 AP grind that'll start again. That could be a problem. Absolutely could. I'm sure it is in many cases, right? But there's something else, and it's something that I kind of touched on the web show, but I think needs expanding properly with some evidence to back it up. There's definitely a large issue with the Nighthold Mythic that hurts guilds and fatigues players more than I think people realize, and it's painful, to say the least. And that is that there is no sense of real progression in the Nighthold Mythic. What do I mean by that? Surely killing bosses is progression. In one sense, sure. Killing a boss is progression. Now then, let's look at what we get with that progression. We get access to the next boss. Okay, that's a given. What about gear? Good point. What about gear? Well, if you're raiding Mythic, and certainly if you can kill the first 3, you are probably smashing the shit out of Heroic, to the point where many guilds are stopping doing Heroic now. It's not worthwhile. So why would people stop doing Heroic and focus entirely on Mythic? Is it for gear reasons? Not really. Not really. And that's because with the combination of Mythic Plus and the Warforged Titanforge system, there's a reasonable chance you're a higher item level already, as I am, than I can realistically get from most of the Nighthold Mythic without getting very lucky. So, as somebody who's not gear-driven, that's not a big factor for me, but as you well know, plenty of people are gear-driven. So if the reward of actually getting serious upgrades for your character reliably dissipates, which it can absolutely do for plenty of guilds who are sort of, if you're more than 60% of the way through the Nighthold Mythic, that can absolutely happen. Absolutely happen. People are getting higher level rewards regularly from Heroic Nighthold, which is magnitudes more easier than Mythic than they are from Mythic. That's where we are. That's actually happening. And if you think about it, it makes sense. People are getting 925 trinkets off Heroic Gul'dan, whereas only 40 guilds in the world have managed to actually defeat Mythic Gul'dan. And that's something you've got to bear in mind, is that you're getting these outrageous rewards, a low chance, but you can clear Heroic in an hour or so, an hour and a half if you're an efficient guild, and you can smash through there without minimal damage. You can use 1 rune, 1 food for the most part, and bash your way through it, no problem whatsoever. And that's something you've got to bear in mind, is that gear element has been wiped off the table. In fact, only 100 guilds, 60 guilds are actually working on Gul'dan. So while 40 have killed it, there's only another 60 who are even working on it. Everybody else in the world isn't even up to it yet. So that's what you've got to consider when you're comparing sort of loot ideas. So that's one sense of progression that has been seriously diminished with the Nighthold. And it's a sense of progression that will diminish every single week going forward and get worse and worse as guilds are stuck against these various bosses. Another sense of progression is also missing, and it's a sense of progression that you don't notice until it's gone, and that is the Nighthold bosses are specifically designed to not be overwhelmed. Now, playing a huge factor in that is just how punishing the mechanics are. You can't overpower a lot of the things that wipe you in Mythic. Is that a problem? A lot of people who don't raid more than likely will probably say, well, that's the way it should be. Unfortunately, the reality of the situation is that raiding has a constant ongoing level of progression, even after you kill bosses. Farming bosses isn't fun. It can be fun if there's a sense of progression in the farming. So what is that? Generally speaking, it's speed kills. It's being able to bring less healers, or healers switching over to DPS for a bit of a giggle, and being able to crush bosses as you feel that your raid strength is growing in power with every passing reset, right? So you have this difficult time overcoming the boss for the first time, and then going forward, that boss becomes easier and easier, and you get to almost bypass mechanics sometimes. You kill bosses before they do certain things, and you have this ongoing sense of progression to the point where even easy bosses become fun, because you might be able to see whether you can smash them into the ground, and that can become fun. So this is where our data comes in. So I did some research because I noticed that despite our resets of clearing heroic and doing mythic, all that kind of stuff, is that our boss kill times weren't really changing. And then I thought, why is that? And then I thought, well, the bosses actually are designed to not allow you to play that way. I mentioned on the web show that I find a lot of the bosses too long. I was like, these bosses are just too long. And a big theme in the Nighthold is that the real dangerous or interesting part doesn't happen till the very end. But that was my feeling. That was my gut feeling. So I took it to the statistics. I did some research. And as it turns out, historically speaking, the Nighthold bosses aren't that long. Okay. There's only one boss over 10 minutes, and that's Gul'dan. Star Augur on first kills rocks in about 10 minutes, but everything else is way low. So if we look at averages, now I don't want to get pedantic people here trying to say what their guild does or whatever. I've taken some averages that are pretty accurate for what people are doing for first kills. I'll put them up in the background. For first kills, we've got things like Scorpion's 5 minutes. Chromatic Anomaly is about 4.5. Trilliax 5 minutes. Spellblade about 7.5. Tyke is 8:30. Starbro about 10. Croesus 6, just over 6 minutes. 9 minutes for Botanist, 9 minutes for Alisander, and about 15.5 to 16 minutes for Gul'dan. Those are on first kills. That's your difficult one, right? That's the one you overcome. Now, historically, every week, that should get lower and lower and lower. So if we actually go back to the Throne of Thunder, and I'll explain why I had to skip some expansions for this, but you can probably guess why. If we go back to the Throne of Thunder, that's actually a monolithic first kill dungeon that shits all over the Nighthold. We had bosses there, if I bring those up, that are regularly over 10 minutes. Several of them near 10 minutes, but we've got 12.5 minutes. Lave Shen, Ironcon's 11.5. 10 minutes, Darumu, Megara's 10 minutes. 11.45 for Horadon. Holy shitballs. Holy shitballs. The shortest fight length there is 5 minutes. And after that, it's 8 minutes. So 7 minutes for Tortoise. Good God almighty. Those are way longer than the Nighthold. What the fuck am I complaining about, right? Here's the thing. Here's the fucking thing. Every week, your guild got stronger. You were able to apply what you gained in the reset as your guild strength grew, as your comfortability with the fights grew. You were able to increase the rate at which you passed through the boring farm bosses. You cannot do that in the Nighthold. On average, the Throne of Thunder boss kill times dropped by 69% over the course of its life. 69%. Look at the times here, the time difference. Yeah? Look at some of the real crazy ones as people got comfortable. Look at Horadon going from nearly 12 minutes down to 3.5. Because you remember, Horadon had weakened phases. So once you got more comfortable with that, you have them snapshotting Warlocks, doing all that kind of thing. All this stuff worked out. We had the Council of Elders go from 8.5 minutes down to 1.5 minutes when it was being seriously farmed by geared people. That is an astronomical difference. And the process of going from A to B, where B would be the finalized times, is a steady progression of the guild as it moves forward and forward, and you feel your guild getting stronger and more powerful. You feel this ever-growing, ever-increasing sense of progression that's not directly tied to the boss that you're waiting to kill next, right? 2.5 months. 2.5 months the Nighthold has been out. In that time, most people have got pretty much everything they want besides Titan Forged everything from the bosses they've killed. Now, what I don't want to happen here is people to say, well, only a few people have killed the last 3. Doesn't matter. Let me bring up bosses like Scorpion, Chromatic Anomaly, and Trilliax. These are bosses that are notoriously easy in the current Mythic Nighthold. Are we seeing that sense of reduction? No. No, we're not. In fact, the Nighthold that's being farmed has only seen a 2% overall drop in boss kill times since they were released and first killed. Scorpion first kill about 5 minutes. Average farm kill, about 5 minutes. Chromatic Anomaly's first kills were about 4.5 minutes. The average kill time is actually 5. Trilliax, 5 minutes, reduced to 4.5 on farm. Spellblade, 7.5. Average kill time, 7.5. Croesus, just over 6 minutes on its first kill. Average kill time now, about 6 minutes. What the hell is going on? We've got more gear, right? Not with the way Warforged Timeforge works, and the fact that Heroic can be massively zerged and cleared out even on alts, and you can split raid for fun. Not even if you're a hardcore guild, you can do that. And you're getting all these mega upgrades. We're not seeing that sense of progression. And in fact, the bosses are designed not to allow it. And that, for me, is a huge problem in Fatigue. Because it doesn't matter if your first kill feels like your 10th, or your 7th, or your 6th. It wears you the fuck down. Because you do not feel stronger. It doesn't feel like you're there for a purpose. Yeah? It doesn't feel like this is worth killing if nothing happens. We're just ticking the bosses off the list. You are completely reducing most of the raiders in all of the Mythic raided teams to just getting the 10. And that's it. But feeling no sense of reward for doing so. And when gear doesn't make a difference, and actually killing the bosses doesn't make that much of a difference because you won't you won't have a tangible benefit in any way, then that's a problem. If we think about why this is happening then, Scorpion has a huge damage reduction. If you get more and more damage, it doesn't really matter because Scorpion's just preventing you from abusing it. He has very, very short weaken phases. The rest of the time, he's just a big lump of shit that takes way less damage. So he stays around the same kill time because most of your damage goes into a very tiny window, and the rest of it you're just kind of beating your head against his hardened shell. Chromatic Anomaly is the same. The damage he outputs during his transitions is so much that we can't not interrupt it and move on to the next phase, which means dividing the raid. Sure, you might be able to leave 1 or 2 extra people on the boss, but that's where your 30 seconds is being made up. Are you getting a real sense of progression there? Unfortunately, no. Trilliax is the same. You can't ignore the cakes. You're just going to die. You have to have the whole raid running around. You have to deal with all these mechanics. You can't wait and try and stall it or avoid it or out-heal it or anything. You're just going to die, so you can't do anything about it. Spellblade has to be dealt with in the same way. You might say, well, more damage should make it go quicker. Not by a lot, because of the way the mechanics work in that fight. The way that fight is designed is that you will have to be diverting a lot of that damage out of the boss into other areas in order to manage it properly. And it continues on. Tichondrius is the same. These bosses are tuned so tightly, so tightly, that even when you have pretty much gear capped from Heroic, besides Mega Titan Forged everything, that it doesn't matter. Because they're tuned so tightly that you actually need that gear to kill them in the first place. And that's the important thing to take away from this. There's no sense of growing any reward from raiding right now in Mythic. There isn't. And the unfortunate truth is this trend has continued where these fights are not only long, but they're staying long all the time. And as I said, they're they're raid-wipingly punishing from the beginning, which then means they're raid-wipingly punishing from the beginning for the same amount of time. In 6 weeks' time, they'll still be exactly the same. And getting to the end of these fights and wiping because that's where the hard bit is, and then having to start again, that's where your fatigue's coming in for me. That's where your tiredness and your raiders are just, why am I here? What am I doing? Yes, I've killed it. For what? What am I going to do? I mean, especially if you look at the final 3. So the typical final 3 will be Starbro, Elisand, and Gul'dan. Those fights aren't particularly fun. And you probably recall, I'm not changing my tone here, is that the worst fight I declared in the Nighthold is Starbro. And for me, that absolutely continues into Mythic. He's far more punishing, sure. Mechanics-wise, though, he's exceedingly simple. For a Mythic raid team, a lot of people might struggle with it, but understand, for a Mythic raid team, the mechanics that go into fights like Tichondrius, Croesus, Starbro, and so on, aren't difficult. This is child's play stuff to a Mythic raider. Child's play stuff. The problem is, of course, the damage it puts out is so extreme that you can die to it, no matter how well you play. There have been several occasions. If I take my mage to Starbro and I want to play fire, for example, To survive at least the first 30%, should I get unlucky, I'm going to need to both ice block it and I'm going to have to cauterize it because I'm going to die. I'm going to die. The healers can't help it. I'm going to die. And we can't bring extra healers because the damage is just too much that's needed. Too much. What we have here is a combination of things. All adding up that I mentioned at the beginning, and particularly this complete lack of sense of progression. That's what I want to put out there. I'm not saying the Nighthold's too hard. What I'm showing you is factual evidence that there is little to no sense of progression from Scorpion to Gul'dan for a raid that is doing Mythic raiding. It's not there. There isn't one. It's just not visible. It's not tangible. Killing these bosses has no effect on how you play week after week after week. Or is it a visible, tangible reward? Are you seeing this reflected in what you're doing as your primary source of entertainment? And you're not. Whereas historically, in every instance, we've seen that. And the Nighthold says no. And I honestly think that's what the big fatigue is. Now, I'm definitely saying that because I feel that. I'm certainly not going to quit raiding at the moment. I just hope this is not a trend that continues into the Tomb of Sargeras. I know when we kill Starro, we get Elisand. Am I excited about that? Fuck no. Not in the least. I couldn't give a shit about Elisand. I certainly can't give a shit about Gul'dan. As soon as I did this research and found, 16 minutes of fight, probably with uber-crushing fucking punishing mechanics from the word go for 16 minutes... Not that excited about that, bro, honestly. I'm just not that excited. I'm not that thrilled. Am I going to get any gear from it? I'm going to get an achievement. Am I achievement hungry? Not really. Sense of satisfaction is why I do it. Sure, I did it. I managed to get through that. That's why I enjoy it. That's why I personally enjoy it. But I can't apply that to absolutely everybody. And certainly, as we've seen, there are many players who say, it's just not worth my time. It's not worth my time. If I raid for gear... I'm pretty much going to be far more efficient smashing through Heroic in a couple of hours, hoping for some Titanforged. And if I don't, I don't. But what I'm not going to do is spend another 12, 16 hours a week not getting any further, or squashing my head against things, or being overly punished because of somebody else's mistake who might be tired that day, might not be on their A game, and we're just not getting anywhere. So that's what I wanted to throw out there as my thoughts on the subject. I just hope that this trend of making bosses that are naturally designed not to have fun with them as we go through. If I think back to other dungeons, and again, I ignored WoD because we have the legendary rings there. Not that legendaries are some form. I mean, we can make this argument about pretty much any dungeon, is that there was something that happened that made those fights die much quicker than what they were probably designed to do. That's why we do the first kills versus the farm kills. But right now, 2.5 months in, don't tell me people haven't got pretty much everything they want from Scorpion, at least in some form, or Anomaly or Trilliax. The three by far simplest bosses, which thousands of guilds have killed, and the logs show zero improvement on killing those bosses compared to the very first kill when you were just in your basic heroic gear. It's just not happening. So I'd be interested to see your thoughts on it. But there you go. Certainly not a trend I hope continues into the Tomb of Sargeras. Thank you for listening, everybody. Bye-bye.